This is Thames from London. The time is 10 o'clock.
Police say they won't stand and take it anymore. 4 Sikhs are charged with plotting to murder Mr. Gandhi. In South Africa, 3 are killed by the Trojan horse. Leon Klinghoffer was shot twice, American diplomats say. Our video nasty is corrupting our children. Good evening. The Policemen's Union in London has told the Metropolitan Police Commissioner they shouldn't be asked to stand and take everything rioters hurl at them. Mr. John Newman, chairman of the London Police Federation, made a wide-ranging attack on the tactics and policies of senior officers and the Home Office for controlling riots. He said the police are not Aunt Sally's, they are for the fairground. He told the Commissioner, Sir Kenneth Newman, that the police did not have the men to deal properly with drugs, crime, public order and racial attacks. Tonight at a press conference, Sir Kenneth said that according to police information, rioters in Tottenham had stockpiles of petrol bombs ready to hurl at the police from overhead balconies. And in Tottenham today, a white boy aged 13 was remanded in custody for a week, charged with the murder of Police Constable Keith Blakelock. He's the 4th person to be charged with the murder.
At Tottenham, police were pelted with petrol bombs. They stood there and took it. But the men on the front line say they should have gone in, moved forward and dispersed the rioters. Now they say their tactical commanders are at fault. They should have moved their men forward. The chairman of the Police Federation underlined this tonight in front of the Police Commissioner.
There is an urgent need for a review of policy and tactics in such matters, for it seemed to many, those at the scene and those watching it on TV, that simply because police officers were in riot clothing, there was an assumption they could take everything that was hurled at them. Aunt Sally's are for the fairground, not the farm, or indeed any other. Drugs, crime, public order, racial attacks. All of these demand in fairly equal proportions the full attention of police. I do not believe we currently have the manpower to properly deal with them. If the Home Secretary will not authorise an increase in the establishment, then once again the public will be informed that we can no longer supply the service to which they are entitled.
The Federation gave their chairman a standing ovation. He'd also criticised communications between senior policemen and the ranks and said there weren't enough policemen to cope with rising crime.
Mr. Chairman,
Sir Kenneth Newman did not say tactics had been wrong, but hinted they would be changed next time there was a riot.
Police must never again be asked to stand and take such a sustained and vicious attack. When missiles and petrol bombs are thrown, the police response must be firm and it must be immediate.
He was greeted by polite applause and afterwards defended his commander's tactics.
Their feeling is that they would have liked to have gone forward into that estate and carried out an immediate mopping up operation. Their operational commanders felt that if they did that, they would get a savage mauling because there are very difficult walkways in that estate, balconies, and they knew from intelligence that it was quite likely that there were crates and crates of petrol bombs stacked up on those walkways and on those balconies, ready to be hurled down on the heads of the men.
Later, the Home Secretary was asked what he thought about reports of low police morale.
Yes, they said that. But when I went to visit the young officers, the ones who were actually injured in Whittington Hospital, I'm sure they had their criticisms. That's life. When something terrible happens, you do feel critical. You do search around for things that could have been done better. But don't let anyone tell you that the morale of the Metropolitan Police is at an all-time low, because that's not the experience I had from talking to those young men.
But many riot victims do not agree with Mr. Hurd or the Commissioner's explanation.
I think the tactics were totally all wrong. I think we should have learned from the 1981 riots that standing there and having missiles thrown at us is the wrong tactic. It was shown in 1981, and all our SHIELD training is to go forward and not to stand there and take it. And the senior officers who are in charge of that operation down there totally failed to see this, either because they've had insufficient training or they just didn't know what to do.
As tonight's debate raged, the police were still present in some force on the Broadwater Farm estate. But the operation isn't enough to satisfy many tenants. Dozens have asked the council to be transferred to other estates as soon as possible.
I've been mugged, I've been burgled, I've had bottles thrown at my baby, and I've been threatened quite a few times. There's always been trouble on the estate. It's a very depressing place to live. You feel very alienated and frightened. Your friends won't come to visit you because they're frightened. You can't walk through it at night. It's scary to go to the shops.
What have the council said to you?
They just said they do what they can, but they've had so many applications for a transfer, it's probably not possible.
At the neighbourhood housing office, officials are sifting through over 80 new applications from people who want to move.
Some people in certain areas of the estate were severely affected on the Sunday night, and there is considerable concern expressed, especially by the wives and families and children, that it would be difficult for them to stay on the estate. We now have to sift through those to see which cases are of serious concern and which cases have to be therefore moved from the estate.
The council will soon face another problem, for while people are queuing up to leave the Broadwater estate, nobody's asking to go there. Michael Sheridan, News at 10, Tottenham.
4 men being held in Leicester have been charged with conspiracy to murder the Indian Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi during his visit to Britain. They'll appear in court tomorrow.
The 4 men were among about a dozen arrested during the weekend by police in London, the Midlands and the north of England. All 4 are from Leicester's Sikh community. They were charged this afternoon and will appear before Leicester magistrates tomorrow morning. On the day of their arrests, there were protests at the police station. Families of the men claimed they were denied access to the prisoners, and leaders of Leicester's 15,000 Sikhs insisted the men were innocent. Asian leaders around Britain said the arrests were a public relations exercise to appease Rajiv Gandhi. That night, 6 men were released, leaving 4 to face charges. Sikh extremists have been particularly militant since their Golden Temple in Amritsar was stormed by Indian government troops and their leader, Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale, killed. From Rajiv Gandhi's VIP reception at the airport to the full Guard of Honour treatment in London, he was surrounded by the tightest security ever staged around a visiting head of state. The 4 men who've been charged are members of the same community which celebrated Mrs. Gandhi's death as enthusiastically in Britain as in India. Mr. Gandhi had expressed India's belief that Britain is not tough enough on Sikh extremists, who, it's alleged, are funding militants in the Punjab. 6 of those arrested were today released by police in Blackburn, Oldham, Halifax and London. Anne Lucas, News at 10, Leicester.
Teachers in their biggest union in Scotland have voted overwhelmingly to boycott exams next year in pursuit of an independent pay review. The Educational Institute of Scotland voted by 87% to 13% for the most serious escalation of their dispute so far. Scottish teachers have been in dispute for 18 months. In England, the employers were told once again by the Education Secretary, Sir Keith Joseph, that there would be no more money. Teachers have rejected a 6.9% offer, and this was withdrawn today by the employers.
Israel says it has a recording of a radio conversation between the Palestinian leader Abu Abbas and the 4 men who hijacked the Italian cruise ship the Achille Lauro. A military spokesman said the transcript shows that Abbas, who's been freed by the Italians, commanded the operation. The Italian government looks like falling because of the row over the hijacking. Defence Minister Giovanni Spandolini's Republicans have pulled out of the country's 5-party coalition because Abbas was released. The body of the murdered American hostage Leon Klinghoffer has left Damascus on its way back to America. Preliminary investigation showed Mr. Klinghoffer was shot in the head and back and then thrown overboard.
Here the government has reacted quickly to strong criticism of its trade policies from a powerful all-party Lords Committee. The Select Committee on Overseas Trade said the policies constituted a grave threat to Britain's standard of living and would mean higher unemployment and inflation. But the Trade and Industry Secretary, Mr. Leon Britton, said the report was misleading.
The peers claim they've produced the most comprehensive survey of Britain's trade since the war. With several former Conservative ministers and captains of industry on their committee, they forced the government to pay immediate attention to their rather gloomy conclusions. The report points out that Britain's traditional surplus in the volume of manufactured goods has turned into a deficit which has grown rapidly. In 1899, Britain was a leader among major trading nations, with almost a third of the world's market. We still had over a quarter in 1950. But by 1969, that was down to 11%. In 1979, it was 9%. And last year, it was barely 7.5%.
Anyone who's travelled recently in France or in Germany or Japan or America to argue that we're doing very well, thank you, and we're the envy of the world, are deceiving themselves beyond belief. We're starting to go down a slippery slope. The oil so far is, as it were, our drag anchor. If that disappears, we could descend in the 90s over the abyss.
It seems very strange that you should be calling for a change in government economic policy just at the point when, after 20 years of decline, we should be actually increasing our output and our investment.
But the peers say our competitors are doing better than we are. Their visits abroad led them to recommend a much higher priority for industry in Britain, especially in education, along with more money for investment and research and an end to the cutbacks in government support for trade. But isn't the report embarrassing for the government?
I don't think that it's part of our business to worry too much about whom we are embarrassing. We're in search of truth. And it's not impossible that, having read what we put in this report, some people might change their mind a little bit.
In South Africa, police using a vehicle as a Trojan horse shot 3 coloureds near Cape Town today, a report in part 2. Also, violent video nasties are now so freely available that they pose a grave threat to British children, according to a study just out. And the Band-Aid wagon train is beginning to move in the Sudan. That's in a couple of minutes.
At least 4 more coloureds have been shot dead by South African security forces as rioting continued in Cape Province townships. The latest outbreak of violence began after 2 teenagers and a 10-year-old were killed by railway police who ambushed them from the back of a lorry in the suburb of Athlone.
For the stone-throwing students, it looked an easy target. And on its second pass down the suburban street, the government railways truck received the demonstrators' full attention. It was just what the police hidden inside had hoped would happen. It was a brutal introduction to the latest police tactic in riot control. When the firing stopped, 3 people were dead. As news of the killing spread this morning, hundreds of students gathered on the street where their friends had been shot. And today they were looking for confrontation. They didn't have to wait long. The coloured suburban township of Athlone was once again a battleground for security forces and demonstrators. The petrol bombs, falling short, failed to ignite. But the army shotguns found their targets. It's still uncertain precisely how many people were killed or injured today. Only the dead or badly wounded were carried away by the security forces. And for this mother, the total helplessness of not knowing whether her son was dead or alive. Fearing arrest, the injured converged on private clinics like this one at the squatter camp at Crossroads. The police, deeply suspicious of foreign television crews, attempted to clear the area. More direct action was taken against those that stayed on. Today, the police displayed new additions to their arsenal of riot control weapons. Handheld tear gas spray that stains the demonstrators for later identification. And designer riot shields, introduced for the first time in Cape Town this afternoon. But despite the show of strength, civil rights lawyers argue that the closer the riots move to the inner city areas, the more pressure on the police.
Well, I think the Cape Town situation can be distinguished in this respect firstly, and that is that it's an urban situation. And the police response in urban situations tends to be more desperate and very often more violent.
The state of emergency, introduced nearly 3 months ago, has clearly failed to contain the township unrest. And Cape Town tonight, just the latest focal point of a nation's anger. Peter Sharp, News at 10 in South Africa.
The jolly atmosphere at the opening of the Commonwealth Conference in Nassau, nicknamed the Chogam, fooled nobody. Within an hour, South Africa came up, with the Indian Prime Minister making his position crystal clear.
The Pretoria regime is impervious to reason. Let not the Commonwealth be charged with bravery in words and cowardice in action. The Nassau Chogam must demand comprehensive and mandatory sanctions.
But Mrs. Thatcher, who arrived here this morning, says no. She still believes that sanctions will make things worse by forcing the South African government into an immovable lager mentality. Her critics here, which means almost everyone else, disagree. They demand that Britain adds her considerable economic and moral muscle to a strong signal of disapproval from a united Commonwealth. The British are placing their hope on the so-called helpful chemistry of these occasions, the informal lunches and chance meetings where disagreements can often be ironed out. Mrs. Thatcher has sent a letter to the heads of government of the 6 African states closest to South Africa, which Britain openly hints can't expect more aid from London if sanctions against South Africa start hurting them too. But Mrs. Thatcher knows that tempers are running high here on the issue.
I've no doubt it's going to take a very considerable part of the conference and probably also of the weekend retreat. I hope it'll all be settled amicably.
Tempers seem to be running a bit high though, but I suppose that's
well, mine isn't.
The Prime Minister then began her lobbying so promptly that President Kaunda of Zambia almost missed her. Friendly words patched up this misunderstanding. On South Africa, it's going to be much tougher. Michael Brunson, News at 10, Nassau.
Here, a report out today called Video Violence and Children suggests there's a definite link between video nasties and violent behaviour in children who watch them. One of the inquiry team, Sir Martin Roth, who's Professor of Psychiatry at Cambridge, says it's a matter of grave concern that children in their formative years have seen video nasties which are morbid, sadistic and obscene. The report calls for a fundamental review of censorship.
The inquiry defines a video nasty as a film which shows scenes of such violence and cruelty that it would never be passed for general viewing. 59 of them are already banned as obscene or are facing prosecution. Yet video nasties are so widely available that 45% of children aged between 7 to 16, that's 3 million children, have seen one or more of the banned films. The effect, the inquiry reports, is that children become desensitized. They grow accustomed to violent behavior and consider it normal. This is an extract from an essay written by a schoolboy who'd violently attacked other children. People have never witnessed bad killings in real life, so therefore they find exciting watching something never have seen before. The boy's pencil drawings reflect his viewing. He said he was addicted to video nasties and had seen 29 of the banned films. Other children react differently.
Some said they had sleepless nights, or they said in a sick way they enjoyed seeing them. Others said their young children, young brothers and sisters had seen them and woken up screaming. I think, too, it has a copycat effect, and I'm afraid